Welcome back to Historical Context. Today we continue with our Jamestown unit, and this is the fourth episode in the Jamestown unit. And where we last left off, things didn't look very good at all. The colony had shrank by well over 80% during the starving time. The new deputy governor arrived, Sir Thomas Gates, and he decided to take off. Basically, the entire colony packed onto a few ships and left for Newfoundland, and Jamestown was abandoned. So how long was Jamestown abandoned? Because clearly we know our history, and we at least know that Jamestown did not suffer the same fate as Roanoke. It turns out that the abandonment of Jamestown lasted for just one day. The day after Sir Thomas Gates and his group left 13 miles away near a place known as Mulberry Island, the group notices a fleet of English ships. And those ships are headed to Jamestown, led by Lord Delaware, Sir Thomas West himself, with supplies and 150 new colonists. So you can imagine their surprise to see him on his way in person to Jamestown, and you could imagine his surprise having run into them as they were leaving the colony. And had the timing been any different, it's quite possible that Sir Thomas West could have been in the same boat as Sir Walter Raleigh, showing up to an empty colony, wondering what had happened. Now, Lord Delaware was not, I should say, as forgiving as one may find those circumstances to be. He orders the group back to Jamestown, where they comply, and they arrive a couple of days later, and Delaware assumes leadership over the colony. Now, during his trip across the ocean, Sir Thomas Gates wrote laws divine, moral, and martial to put into place in Jamestown when he did arrive. Lord Delaware reviews these laws and decides to approve them, becoming the law of the land essentially in Jamestown. Let's take a look at some of these laws. One law reads that no man speak impiously or maliciously against the Holy and Blessed Trinity, or any of the three persons, that is to say, against God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost, or against the known articles of the Christian faith, upon pain of death. Another article: no man shall use any traitorous words against his Majesty's person or royal authority upon pain of death. Another article reads, every man and woman duly twice a day upon the first tolling of the bell shall upon the working days repair unto the church to hear divine service upon pain of losing his or her day's allowance for the first omission, for the second to be whipped, and for the third to be condemned to the galleys for 6 months. Another law: no man shall commit the horrible and detestable sins of sodomy upon pain of death, and he or she that can be lawfully convicted of adultery shall be punished with death. Another law: he that shall take an oath untruly, or bear false witness in any cause, or against any man whatsoever, shall be punished with death. Here's another law: no man shall give any disgraceful words, or commit any act to the disgrace of any person in this colony, or any part thereof, upon pain of being tied head and feet together upon the guard every night for the space of 1 month, besides to be publicly disgraced himself and be made incapable ever after to possess any place or execute any office in this employment. So again, any disgraceful words, any act of disgrace, you have your head and feet tied together for a month, and you cannot own any property or hold any employment. Wow. Here's another law. No man of what condition soever shall barter, truck, or trade with the Indians, except he be thereunto appointed by lawful authority, upon pain of death. And finally, no man shall rifle or despoil by force or violence, take away anything from any Indian coming to trade or otherwise, upon pain of death. So death was quite the penalty in Jamestown for pretty much any offense. I find it fascinating that that eighth and last law we read talked about basically doing no harm unto the natives. We hear a lot in today's history about how Europeans arrived to America, they treated the natives brutally, essentially engaging in mass genocide, and that's how America was quote-unquote conquered. And there is some truth to that. There was certainly some horrible behavior. We saw it with De Soto. We saw it with other Spanish conquistadors. But here in Jamestown at this time, in the year 1610, it is against the law to harm a native. And I think it's important for people to know that there were individuals, whether they were in positions of power or not, trying to protect or to build relationships with these natives. It wasn't a we show up and just mow them down type deal. There is attempts being made at relationships. There are certainly laws being put into place to promote civility. And so the listener should take away the fact that Jamestown wasn't either some anarchy or some institution that had this horrible view of Native Americans or was legally, in the legal sense of that era, that the legal forces were condoning that kind of behavior, because that is not the truth. There were some other rules that I'll just briefly touch on. There was a rule condemning death for anyone who committed murder. Surprise, surprise. There was a lengthy rule about the role of preachers and ministers, and a near precise schedule and location as to how they're going to go about their activities. Preachers were also required to record christenings, marriages, and deaths. So if you're on Ancestry.com and you see a christening, a marriage, or a death that is occurring in the 17th century in Virginia, and you're wondering, man, how were those records kept, or how did they even survive? Well, it comes from laws like these that required people to record those events. There was a rule that made embezzlement illegal. There were provisions established for livestock. There was a law about the throwing out of dirty water, punishable by censure. So I guess the dirty water rule was the first environmental law in America. And if you think about it, that makes sense. These people aren't in totally close quarters, but they're kind of close together. You don't want your neighbor throwing soiled water right out on the street in front of your place. So that's why that law is there. There was a law regarding keeping your home clean and to have your bed 3 feet or more off the floor. So almost like a health department rule, if you will, for that era. Robbing a garden was punishable by death. And ultimately, there were a total of 37 laws for the civilians of 1610 Jamestown to follow. There were only 210 people with 37 laws, and there were an additional 47 laws for soldiers, and those were more procedural in nature, so I don't have any in specifics to share with you today. Now, just because Lord Delaware shows up with supplies does not mean the problems of Jamestown are resolved. Another assessment is conducted and shows that there is a food shortage, and it's going to threaten the health of the colonists once again. So Lord Delaware sends a man by the name of Samuel Argall to Bermuda to acquire more food and supplies. Argall is a figure that we're going to see kind of come about in significance here a little bit later. Argall ends up getting blown off course, ultimately landing on the north coast of the Chesapeake Bay, in an area he ends up naming after Lord Delaware, and you may recognize it as Delaware. And as luck may have it, Argall would run into our dear friend Henry Spellman, who is probably at this point wondering what is going on. He has been with the Powhatan natives for nearly a year, and at one point, technically, I guess it'd be only for 2 or 3 days, was likely the only European in Virginia. Argall would negotiate Henry Spellman's release before going up to Massachusetts to catch fish and bring them back as food for the Jamestown colonists, and he would return in the month of September. Lord Delaware decides at this time to take a decidedly firm stance on the natives in the area. In July, he sends Sir Thomas Gates to a tribe affiliated with the Powhatan to avenge the death of a colonist who was killed by this group. The slaughter that Sir Thomas Gates leads causes this native group to consolidate with the Powhatan tribe. So the socioeconomics, or the ethnography, I should say, actually, of this tribe is ultimately altered because of this attack. Throughout the summer, Delaware orders the reconstruction of Jamestown and the building of 2 new forts at the mouth of the James River. Those forts would be named Fort Henry and Fort Charles. Lord Delaware also threatens Chief Powhatan with war if he continues to cut off trade with the settlers. And that was part of the difficulty of those early relationships. Somebody would do something wrong, and then the chief would respond by cutting off trade, which would make things worse for the colonists, and things would kind of heat up from there. Delaware put his foot down and basically said he wasn't going to tolerate it anymore, and we'll see how that goes. He uses Samuel Argall and George Percy to lead various assaults on Powhatan allied villages. So this goes back to that 8th law I was talking about, and how it's not a very useful law if the governing authorities are going to go ahead and do all of these things to the natives there. So again, those actions stifle out any effectiveness that those laws would have had. Now, despite all these raids, the colony is able to build a good relationship with the Potawatomis and are able to trade with them through the winter of 1610 and into 1611. So that winter ends up being far less harsh than the starving time, thanks to the Potawatomis. During the spring of 1611, Lord Delaware becomes ill, and he decides to leave Jamestown and go back to England. And he chooses George Percy to serve as his deputy governor. Now, why not Sir Thomas Gates, you might ask? Well, Sir Thomas Gates goes back to England with Lord Delaware. So I guess in this case, they're just going to go with the most experienced person they can find that's being left behind, and that would be George Percy. So George Percy serves as Lord Delaware's deputy governor. At the same time in England, so we're over in England right now, Captain Newport, remember him, he's been a big-time supplier, if you will, of the Jamestown colony, is preparing to leave with 300 new settlers and a new deputy governor, Sir Thomas Dale. At the same time, in the spring of 1611, the third charter of Virginia is drafted, and the principal purpose of this charter was to expand the geographic scope of the Virginia Charter to include Bermuda, where the English were settling another colony, and that colony seemed to be going well. In May of 1611, Sir Thomas Dale arrives and becomes deputy governor, relieving George Percy of duty. Dale arrives and assesses the colony and sees that it's in poor condition. In June, he issues additional instructions for, quote, better inhabiting the colony. Among these instructions was that every new governor of new towns and forts should take their oath of allegiance to His Majesty. The leaders of these new towns are charged with defending the town and ensuring that their respective armies are trained and ready to defend it. The instructions go on to specifically detail what leaders are to wear on the field of battle. The governor or fort commander is banned from leaving the area of their jurisdiction as to always have their eyes on it, essentially. Here are some other things that Sir Thomas Dale notes as being banned activity. Conference with the enemy without leave or warrant from the Lord General, Lieutenant General, Marshal, or Chief and Principal Command for the present. The designs, enterprises, and estate of the colony revealed to the enemy whatsoever by privy messages or missives or otherwise in what sort soever. So essentially, in that case, telling the enemy, hey, there's a church here, hey, there's something here. Anything there is considered a crime. Of anyone taken prisoner by the enemy having means to escape and not returning to the colony again unless he have given faith. So that's one where I don't know where else you'd go if you escaped the prisoner of the enemy, but if you escape being a prisoner and you don't return to the colony, you're in trouble. Of receiving or protecting any Indian, stranger, or suspected spy or supposed enemy into house or any convert without making it known to the general or chief officer and without leave from him to do so. So that's a crime. Harboring the enemy, essentially. Here's another one. Of breaking the truce or peace at any time concluded with the Indian, without leave and warrant expressly given by him who hath power so to do. So that's another one going back to the laws of Sir Thomas Gates, where you are to do no harm, essentially, to the native population. Of ransacking, ransoming, or violently outraging and despoiling the country people, or making war upon them, be it in body or goods, unless they be declared enemies and warrant given to make prize of. So again, another continuation of not harming the natives. Another area that's banned, of striking or fighting with any other man, having a quarrel unto him, and not beholding his or their hands, when an officer or third party comes between and cries, Hola! I don't know about the second part of that, but the striking or fighting and quarrel, again, banned, not allowed in the colony. Another item of revenging a new wrong or old injury by any course contrary to the peace of the camp or the colony. So no vigilantism is allowed in Jamestown. Another behavior that's banned of a soldier enrolling himself in two companies at one time. Now that makes you wonder if they had a problem there at Jamestown where somebody would enroll in one company and then enroll in another, and what they were probably doing was getting paid twice. So it was some type of fraud scheme that was going on. So they had to make a rule that said you can't enroll yourself in two companies at one time. And finally, of a soldier feigning himself sick when any service is to be performed. I think that in our lifetimes we've all come across those people where for some reason when it's a big moment for them to be reliable, they're not feeling well or something's going on or they're feeling faint. Well, you can't do that in Jamestown. So Sir Thomas Dale issues 47 more new instructions in total on top of the ones we just read. And he continues those instructions in detail with each rank of the military as well being specified. How does Sir Thomas Dale's instructions come across? 47 new instructions. Does it help? Does it bring order to Jamestown? Is there more of a democratic presence forming in Jamestown? We're going to talk about that, but we're also going to talk about the truth of Pocahontas. And we're going to do that in 2 weeks. We're off next week for Memorial Day, so we'll be back June 7th with a new episode, Jamestown and Pocahontas, on Historical Context.